Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to the Lunch and Learn webinar with the Colorado Broadband Office. My name is Megan Gernert with the CBO. Today we are featuring a group called KidsLink Colorado and the successes and challenges of their efforts in improving broadband in Colorado schools. For those on the line, please make sure you are muted to prevent any background noise, and I'll just hand it right over to Denise to get started, and I think everyone can introduce themselves when they start their section of the presentation. So Denise, it's all yours.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome to everyone who has spent their lunch today with us. I'm going to have Josh Chisholm from Education Superhighway start us off. And Josh, if you go ahead.
Thanks, Denise. My name is Josh Chisholm, and I'm a program manager and E-rate subject matter expert with Education Superhighway. We are a national nonprofit, and since 2016, we have been working with the Office of IT and the Department of Education and the CEBC on supporting Colorado districts with the goal of getting every public school in Colorado and the country connected to high-speed scalable broadband by 2020, at which time we will be going away, but KidsLink Colorado and the CEBC will be continuing their mission. I'm just going to give some basic overall view of how things have improved, the progress that's been made over the past few years before handing it off to the other folks to talk about some specifics of our work. So as you can see, the year prior to us starting this endeavor, 2015, only about 3/4 of the school sites in Colorado had a connectivity level where they were even meeting 100 kilobits per student per second, which is the minimum. That was the goal set in 2014 by the educational technology directors to be the minimum that schools should have at each of their campuses. You can see that amazing progress has been made over the past 4 cycles. Just going up through the 2018 E-rate filing year, we were at over 98% of the campuses in the state meeting that connectivity goal, which is amazing. You'll note that there's not a 2019 number on here. We're currently finalizing our data for our annual report, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'll make sure and share that out with Megan and the other folks so that you can have access to that. And let's see, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. The other side of that, obviously we want everyone to have the bandwidth they need to do what they want to do in curriculum for their students, but it needs to be affordable. And there's been some amazing progress made in Colorado on that front. You can see in 2016, almost $8 per megabit for connectivity for internet access in the state. And as of 2019, we're down well below $3 a meg, which was our first target, almost down to $2 a meg. And if you think about the fact that the sort of standard circuit for a decent sized school in Colorado is 1 gigabit of throughput, you know, you're dropping from over $7,000 a month to $2,000 a month for that circuit, and then you add an E-rate discount on top of that, and that's a substantial savings. That's money that you can really do things with within your district. So really exciting, and that continued. We're seeing drops like that around the country. Colorado's has been quite dramatic, and we're hoping to see even more when we look at and update our numbers here in the next few weeks. And when we talk about getting people onto scalable broadband, ideally what we're talking about is a fiber optic connection. Now, for smaller sites or very remote sites or sites with difficult terrain, microwave or fixed wireless connections can also be considered scalable. Those are the two, when we say a scalable connection, that's generally what we're referring to. And again, we can see some real progress that's been made thanks to all the folks at IT, Department of Ed, CEBC, over the past few years. the state was in really good shape actually in 2016. There were only about 60 campuses that lacked that scalable infrastructure. And by 2019, we had dropped that to 17. And I think we're actually even below that at this point. And as I said, we'll have some updated numbers coming out shortly. As you can see, unsurprisingly, the majority of these unscalable campuses are in rural areas. And those are the places where we're still facing challenges, and we're overcoming them. But with smaller populations, longer distances, rougher terrain, that's where the challenge is. We do believe every school should have these connections, and we're working really hard to get them there. But that is where the bulk of the non-scalable campuses are at this point in the state. And so, as you can see, a ton of progress has been made in the state. I think everyone should feel good about where Colorado is in this effort, but there is still work to do. Since 2015, over 500,000 students have been moved up to what we consider meeting those minimum bandwidth goals of 100 kilobits per second per student. There's still about 4,500 students that are not there, and we want to see them with equal access to the rest of their peers. And the other thing is, starting in 2018, CETA and the FCC set the new minimum standard for bandwidth at 1 megabit per second per student. That's the long-term goal. And as you can imagine, far fewer districts meet that goal than meet the 100 kilobits goal. On the plus side, based on our analysis and the information we have on our website, compareandconnect12.org, 54 districts in Colorado have their internet service contracts expiring this coming cycle. And based on the peer deals we've seen and the pricing information we have, about 2/3 of them should be able to upgrade to at least a megabit per second per student and not add any cost, out-of-pocket costs, stay within their current budget. Because of the prices dropping, because of more competition in the state, that's feasible now, and we really encourage you to do that. I will definitely send out some links to our website so you can go in and see how we calculated all this information. Right now, we're seeing 11 districts that have one or more campuses lacking a scalable WAN circuit. And again, if you go onto our Compare and Connect site, you can see the details on that. And I think I've got one more slide. So as I mentioned, we had an 8-year mission. We started in 2012. We were funded by philanthropic organizations with the goal of completing our mission by 2020 and then closing our doors. We're on track. With support of partners like OIT and the Department of Ed and CEBC, we're on track to reach our goal let's be honest, our goal is 100% of America's public schools. But 100% is, I don't know if we're going to get there. We will be well over 99% of America's public schools being connected at that minimum goal. And what we will be working on this next year is what we've always been working on, which is working directly with districts that need help with these upgrades, providing expert support to them, but also working with KidsLink Colorado and the folks that are hosting this webinar to make sure that schools in Colorado continue to have support for getting funding through the E-rate program, for understanding how to meet their digital needs, and definitely having access to affordable, scalable broadband in every part of the state. We're going to continue to work on that until the day the doors close. And as I said, I'll be available to help any folks at Colorado districts that need assistance in this coming E-rate cycle. That concludes my portion of the webinar. Thanks so much. I'll hand it back to Denise.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to introduce briefly and have them introduce themselves a bit. The 3 members from the Colorado Broadband Coalition, the Colorado Educational Broadband Coalition, which is the group of schools and BOCES members that have come together to negotiate bandwidth for school districts across Colorado. And I think I'll start with Arlene Salyard from Northeast BOCES, and then you'll hear Jared Masterson from East Central BOCES and Tim Miles from Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
Okay, thanks, Denise. As Denise said, I'm Arlene Salyers. I work for the Northeast Colorado BOCES. And in case you weren't aware, it's the very northeast corner of the state of Colorado. We're very rural. And when we're looking at the slide right now that says, I think we're going to look at this slide that says understanding the why. I can tell you the why. I mean, I always used to say to all of my teammates, Tim, Denise, Jared, why is it that I have to pay so much more for my broadband services? And people would tell me it's because where you're located. And I totally understood that for a while because I understand how infrastructure has to be built and there are costs that we have to recoup along the way. But after so many years, I kept asking the question, but why do I still have to pay so much for my broadband services? So I had led an effort with our 12 school districts in our BOCES, and several years ago I would support them in their E-rate services, and I would file 12 different applications for their E-rate, and we would just bid individually for their internet services. And then we got a little smarter along the way, and then we would do an RFP for just our BOCES, just our 12 districts, and of course our prices came down a little bit, but there were still an extreme amount of costs built into our service. So it's always good to network with people who are much smarter than you, and so that's how I developed my team. I have this team that works with me, and I started asking them and talking to them about, like, how can we work together? How can we start thinking, you know, in a bigger scale to get more broadband services? So that's when we all came together.
Do that or get a picture.
That's when we all came together and looked at the whole RFP process as a whole. So with that being said, and the others can chime in here too, but with that being said, for me, it's been a great service for our districts. We reduced our costs tremendously, and eventually we'll have some slides on how that cost was reduced for us. But not only that, it's the services that we can offer our districts. It's the services that kids can benefit from. And that's really why we're doing the work that we're doing, is so that we can improve the quality of the educational services for our students. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to the rest of my team.
Awesome. Tim, I'll take it from here, and then you can jump in when you're ready. My name is Jared Masterson. I'm the Director of Technology for the East Central BOCES in Colorado. So we are Arlene's neighbor to the south. We're in much the same position as Arlene and her districts were a few years ago. Obviously a slightly different geography, although it looks very similar when you drive across it. And so we were seeing a lot of the same things that Arlene was, pricing that just didn't make a lot of sense when we were comparing it to some of the pricing that we could get, even inside of our different district localities. We were seeing that in some cases we could get pretty affordable broadband, but in other places it was just not available at all. In some cases we would see that happening within the difference of a few miles, just depending on local incumbent providers. So I always like to tell this story about how Arlene had suggested years ago now that the directors of technology from the various BOCES organizations, we should get together and we should do some meeting and just see what comes of it, because there wasn't a specific purpose. We weren't meeting for a particular reason, but, like, you know, who doesn't need an extra meeting or two, right? So we actually started meeting, and along the way, this was the topic that kept coming up. That we were having broadband difficulties. Either it wasn't available at all or it wasn't affordable when it was. And so that became our mission. And it was just a fortunate set of circumstances that helped us connect with Education Superhighway and the Governor's Office of OIT kind of at the same time when there was so much focus on the cost of broadband, especially in K-12 school districts. So I don't know what the next slide here is, but if we want to move on to it. All right. Yeah, so Tim and Arlene, go ahead and jump in wherever, but I'll do some talking around this. So believe these are like real world bandwidth cost numbers that we in the districts that we started to work with in the first year actually were experiencing. So as you can see, that monthly cost is for districts 1 and 2 is actually incredibly high. So we actually brought all of these school districts together, 35 in the first year, and said, well, if we are all facing this same issue and we are all putting out individual RFPs, then we're always getting the same results. So if we want to improve what we're seeing, we need to do something a little bit differently. So the idea was, especially in that first year, we didn't know if it was going to work, was that we should present a single, large target for vendors to hit. Part of the thinking behind it was that obviously getting some, some scalability in numbers, but also making it simpler for a vendor to actually respond to that. So if we have a single RFP that has a defined set of requirements and then various delivery addresses, it makes it less onerous for the vendors to actually respond to that. And so if you can think about the difference of needing to respond to the particulars of one RFP with 35 locations versus 35 different RFPs, if you've ever had to do an RFP response, you can quickly see how that becomes unattractive, especially if those are smaller districts, smaller sites with lower potential revenue. So this slide here kind of provides some comparison in districts 1 and districts 2 to the year prior to the some feedback here. In the year prior to the CEBC actually initiating our first RFP, and then District 3 is one of those districts that was experiencing those higher prices the year prior, after we actually signed them up onto the vendor.
Yeah.
Sorry, we keep getting some odd feedback here. So, all right. So one of the things that we like to highlight and talk about is a little bit of the progression along the way. And so as you can see here, we have some information for what we were seeing in 2008, 2016, 17, and then 18. That 2017 year is the first year that the CEBC, and I don't know if we ever spell that acronym out, but Colorado Education Broadband Coalition, for those keeping notes at home. We started that RFP process in the for the 2017-18 school year. One of the other things we like to point out is that not only did we get a bid response that was that was 10 times lower than the price per megabit that most of our districts were seeing before, but we also got 7 responses to that RFP, whereas most of those districts in the past were either seeing a single bid response or seeing no bid responses at all. I've had RFPs that I posted myself that were in that situation. We would post the RFP, make it public, let people know about it, and then nothing would happen, and then we're ready to close, and we have to call up a local provider and say, hey, did you forget us? Because we were expecting you to bid on this. So that was one of the key the key findings that we had, was that when we put a larger bid response or a bid package together, an offering for vendors to hit, that we will likely see additional vendors offering that. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on. All right, so what the CEBC coalition looks like today. So 83 member districts, not just districts, we have a couple of non-school district members. So that is an important point, because we do not say that we actually have to be only for school districts. We welcome libraries as well. We have a strategy for incorporating them and allowing them to access E-rate dollars as well. And then last year, we actually had a couple of just private entities that that signed up to be a part of this cooperative purchasing program. So 38 of those have been contracted, so they are actually purchasing through this contracting vehicle. And then those 38, we have just about 1 gigabit per second per site for each one of those. So, all right, Arlene, is that you?
I think that these 2 slides that we have here are from the provider. I'm not sure if Tim can talk a little bit about them, or you, Jared. The provider that we've contracted with, we asked them to give us some hints about what you might do if you were writing a contract. From a provider's perspective, we wanted to have some interaction and thought about what a provider sees when you write an RFP. And these are the things that they talked about that would help anybody who's working on an RFP for their district. Or for us, it gave us some insight about what things are make our RFP more attractive, or what things we might want to look at when we write. And so I think that's kind of these 2 slides. And so, Tim, are you comfortable with that, or?
I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Hi, everybody. This is Tim Miles. I'm the other member of CEBC from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. So we have 5 or 6 districts on the western slope who've contracted through CEBC for broadband services, and it's made a huge difference over here on the western slope as far as our costing of what we were and what we're doing. But basically, these slides are just saying keep it broad. Keep your alternatives open. Don't be so specific when you enter your RFPs, and it'll allow you to change and modify, and the bidders to be a little more creative in the responses back to you. Basically, what this slide here is looking at, and be open to different solutions, hybrid. And if you want to talk more on this, we can later individually.
Tim, we can move to the next slide, and I think the be open piece, you've had some extremely creative opportunities, and so if you could talk a little bit about how getting your districts to be more open and to look at RFP aggregation like CEBC and how that's been helpful.
Yeah, so what we did up here in Steamboat's a little bit different from, we didn't just think of the school district when we originally wanted to increase broadband up here. We partnered with the city and the county, the electric authority, and the hospital, and created a group called NCB, which is Northwest Colorado Broadband. And that group then goes out and purchases the broadband power even as a consortium. It's not as large as CBC, but in my little area, it's a very large consortium of the major consumers in this area. And us together, it brings some political voice where we didn't have it before, and it brings us some more buying power. And then the open side of it is it's an open network. So NCB's mandate is it's a open access network. So the network that we've built up here, anybody can access it for any reasons at the exact same cost. And we don't filter it down like the traditional telco model where it's per bandwidth. So if you want to have access to dark fiber, you have access to it no matter who you are at the same rate that anybody would. And that's what keeps it open. And so we have businesses have access to it, and or actual homes, and even some ISPs use it.
Okay. I'm going to move to Tony, unless somebody else from Arlene or Jared or Tim have a last.
I was just going to offer just one point on what Tim said about keeping your RFP open, because part of what we asked for in the RFP was firewall services, which is something that was not, some districts weren't interested in, but some were. So it was a big cost savings for some of our small districts because they were able to push their firewall services to our service providers. So that was a great option for some, but some of them still chose to manage their own firewall services. So it was open-ended, allowing them to make choices.
And this is Tim. I'll add one more thing before we go on to the state here. CEBC, we encourage you to still bid on your own as well. And all we're going to do is bid for you. And then if our prices come in better than yours and you like them, then you'll still have that direct connection with your own contract with the vendor. We're just bidding for you. So you're not contractually obligated to use anything that we do for you. All we're actually doing is bidding on your behalf. If you like it, you can use it. If you don't, just go on your own. Simple as that. So those of you that aren't familiar with what we do, it's pretty very simple. And so when Jared mentioned before the contracted entities, there was 38. There's 83 members. 38 have chosen to contract through us. You're not obligated to do anything like that. There's a perfect example. 83, we've bid for them, and half of them, roughly, we've did a good job, and the other half have chosen to go on their own.
And Tim, can you talk about some of the 83 that have leveraged our bidding process and our numbers to negotiate on their own?
Yeah, I know one very large district that's used our numbers because our numbers collectively were better than what they did on their own. So they used our contract to leverage their existing contract to lower the prices. And then I also know of another district out here on the Western Slope who the ISP did not want to lose as a customer. They used our contract as well, our pricing, to renegotiate and match that pricing for a smaller district in Colorado. And they already had that relationship, so there was no sense in switching to us, so it just made sense. And it's a win-win for everybody. They got better pricing and better added value, and we were able to assist with that. So it's a win-win for Colorado and the students.
Yeah, great points, Tim and Denise. If you are interested in additional information, I don't know how in the weeds we want to go, so I'm not going to unless I get a specific question about it, but about the contracting process that CEBC uses and how a specific entity might participate. Feel free to ask that later or check out our website. I put the link in the chat there, and so we're happy to talk about that, but that gets pretty dry pretty fast, but we'll definitely talk about it if anybody wants.
Okay, our next speaker is Anthony Neal Graves with the Colorado Broadband Office, and I'm going to give it to you, Tony. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Denise. And again, I'm Tony Neal Graves. I do go by Tony because I like to be friends with everybody. And I'm the executive director of the Colorado Broadband Office, and I've been asked to kind of tie all this together. And one of the things I always like to point out from the time that the state created this office, the Kids Link Colorado program was already in flight. And I always hold it up as being one of the best examples I think that the state has in terms of collaborative effort between the state, education superhighway, the school districts, and organizations like the Colorado Education Broadband Coalition, and the federal government, who provides the funding through E-rate. And many of you heard me, say this before, that I think one of the things that the state has to do is get our unfair share of federal money. We all know how difficult it is to apply for E-rate and other grant programs that exist at the federal level. And what Kids Link Colorado has demonstrated that if we come together as a group, we can help facilitate bringing more resources, financial resources into the state and addressing a need that's very critical. And I'd like to see more of that. And so as we look at other federal programs that are also being brought to the front from the FCC and USDA, we're going to continue that effort through my office. And one of the things I also like to point out about this effort, many of you know that one of the challenges that we have with our bigger goal, which is ensuring that all households have access to broadband, is the missing middle mile and making sure that there's fiber into the community. So if we're working with anchor institutions like schools and libraries, we're pushing that fiber infrastructure further and further. So again, I think that's one of the reasons why a program like Kids Link Colorado is so important. And the other thing that was mentioned, is about affordability. And so my 4 pillars of broadband communications capabilities is, one is access. Do you have the ability to get connected? Is it affordable? Can you pay for it? And again, through the data that you've seen from this presentation, we've significantly driven down the cost of that broadband access. And then there's quality. So, what's the speed that you have? And so obviously getting fiber to as many people as we possibly can is a really great goal for us to try to achieve as well. And then finally, it's about the reliability of that connection as well. And I think that's something that the state needs to continue to work on as well. So let's go to the next slide real quick. And I want to point out that Josh mentioned this earlier. We've made tremendous amount of progress. And I'm a visual person, so I always like to see it on a map. As of 2018, 98% of the kids in the state essentially have access, and we'll hopefully see some really good data in the next few weeks that will continue to close that gap. And as Josh mentioned, obviously our goal is 100%. But it's always very difficult to get to 100%. So if I get to 99.9%, I'm going to declare victory. And we'll continue to work on this issue as we go forward. And then the final slide that I'd just like to show real quickly is it points out where we still have to do work. Because as Josh mentioned, we have a new goal, which is 1 megabit per student. The good news is, again, as Josh mentioned, is that many of the school districts already have contracts in place that if they renew them, they could renew them and get additional bandwidth at very reasonable cost. But one of the commitments that I want to make to everybody in the state of Colorado is that as the Education Superhighway organization sunsets in 2020, we're going to continue this effort from the state perspective and try to provide that continued momentum working with the school districts, because we can't afford to allow our students not to have access and not have access to quality broadband. And as I mentioned earlier, it ties into everything that we're trying to do in terms of ensuring that the whole state is really in the forefront in terms of providing this kind of connectivity. And the last comment I'll make, and I'm sure many of you also feel this way as well, I view broadband infrastructure as infrastructure. It's not a nice to have. It's just like the investments that we've made in this country for electricity, for transportation. This is the next thing that we have to continue to do. And I'm encouraged by some of the things that I see going on at the federal level. I still think that there'll probably be some challenges in terms of how that money flows down to the states and to the communities that really need it. And the final thing I'd like to mention is that I think is most important, that cannot get lost in this, that it has to be a collaborative effort between all of the stakeholders involved. And I think the biggest asset that you bring in the communities is your aggregation of demand, because that RFP process that was described by the CEBC is the way that you're going to get the kind of connectivity that you need at the cost that you need. Because any business that's going to look at an RFP, they have to believe that they're going to get enough of a return for the investment that they're going to make. And if you can bring your demand together, that's the best way for this to happen. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Denise, and we can open it up to any questions that might be from the audience.
Megan, can you go back to that last slide for just a minute?
Sure.
Tony, I can see the slide from a different perspective than standing up on the stage when we did this at Mountain Connect. And almost all the blue that you have highlighted are CEBC member districts.
Absolutely. That's a great point to make. And
oh my gosh.
That is a great point to make.
So now you can go on, Megan. I think Megan has volunteered to kind of oversee questions from the audience. And we have a few that we sort of wondered about ourselves. So if you don't speak up, we have a few that we can share, but we'd certainly like to hear from all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are on the phone and have a question, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Otherwise, we'll jump in with some of our own questions for ourselves. So we have a few prepared questions that we can talk about. We have about 20 minutes to just expand on different topics. So we'll start with this list of questions, and if anyone on the phone wants to jump in, feel free. So the first question is, many rural districts lack the knowledge, staff capacity, and resources to fully understand funding options and broadband capacity. Where do they begin? Who wants to take this one?
I can jump in for a minute here, and the others can chime in as well. But you begin by start communicating with your resources. For example, we've offered CBC, Education Superhighways attended our meetings. OIT has been very supportive. The broadband office, and so I mean, it's like forming that network. So you just get started by talking to people and forming a network. That's how we started. Form a network, ask questions, and then there's power in numbers. I support my districts because that's my job at my BOCES, and but there are other resources and ways to get involved, and there's organizations in Colorado that can link you up with the right people, such as Calais. Jared, Tim, anyone else have any further thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I would echo some of what you were just saying there, Arlene. For especially for rural districts, pretty much every single rural district is a member of a BOCES organization. So we do encourage you to reach out to your local BOCES if you are needing to make some additional connections. You can also come straight to us from a district perspective, for sure. We are often finding ourselves in the shoes of like the traveling salesman, where we are heading around the state to basically talk about CEBC at any and all kind of meetings that we find ourselves welcome at. So we do present at the BOCES Association meetings at the state level, at the regional level with superintendents meetings, and things like that. So we can provide you some additional support. Your local BOCES is a good place to start as well. And then, as Arlene said, we do have some resources in the state, like the Governor's Office of OIT and the Broadband Office. But it is it's a thing where you have to ask, right? Because we are and will always remain a local control state. And so there's nobody that's going to come knocking on your door and saying, I have the answer for you right here. And you're welcome, because you do have to do some opting in.
And I'd like to sort of speak up for just a minute and say these guys are being very modest. Join the Colorado Educational Broadband Consortium, the CEBC. It's easy to do. Go to the website, sign the letter of agency, let them run an RFP process for the bandwidth that you need, and let's see if the RFP response that we get, because we'll have a larger aggregation, will be better for your district.
Good job. I agree.
So another question is, what are the important factors to consider when thinking about your digital needs for the future? Is it different from 5 years to 10 years? What are the important things to think about?
For me, I can jump in. I'll start with this one. It's just looking at your population and understanding your population and the area the tech is moving. So you have to be ready for the added values that are coming. So you can't be thinking about it when all of a sudden your network is designed for one thing per person on the network, and all of a sudden they're bringing 3 to 10 things per individual on the network. So just the Internet of Things, it's coming. As you know, everything you see is ask Alexa, ask those digital devices, and they'll tell you the answer. So everything is moving that way. So as tech leaders, you need to be prepared for that, and they all consume bandwidth. They all have to talk to the mothership somewhere that's outside of us. Right? You need to be ready.
Tim,
for that.
have you implemented a lot of Internet of Things in your schools?
I wouldn't say I've implemented. They've came to me, and some things we've implemented, and some things we haven't. Those things you ask, I think in education, since we're stewards of data, we have to be very careful with some of those Internet of Things. But some of them are coming, and we're not going to be able to stop them. Like your heating HVAC system, all that stuff is connecting currently to what they call little spider units, but it's going to connect directly to Wi-Fi here real soon. So that your things, when they stop spinning or stop pumping water, they'll directly tell you instantly over the internet.
Tim, I was going to kind of the exact same place you went when I first looked at that question, was that not only do we need to ensure that we have additional capacity expansion capabilities for the broadband hitting the district or the school doorstep, but that Wi-Fi connectivity. You're spot on about the number of devices per student, and also the amount of data each of those devices is requiring. Thinking about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I think about 10 years before now. So 10 years prior to now, I was serving the 17 of my school districts with a 100 meg internet connection, and now I'm pushing the top end of 2 gigabits. So in a 10-year time frame, we've seen what some of our districts are definitely conservative in their transition to a digital curriculum. So even those districts and those sites that are very prideful in their old school ways, let's say, are still seeing huge explosions of usage and bandwidth. And so delivering it to the doorstep is one thing, delivering it to the individual classroom is another. And one of the big pieces that I think a lot of sites are not going to be prepared for as it relates to Wi-Fi deployment is the structured cabling that is going to be required to install these newer access points. Wi-Fi or 802.11ax or Wi-Fi 6, as they're calling it, is out in spec now, and manufacturers are building it. But most of the cabling we have, and especially in our older buildings, are category 5 and 5E, which are typically only good to about a gigabit per run. These higher bandwidth access points that are going to wind up being required to deal with the device density that our schools are going to be dealing with, they actually need more than what those cables can deliver in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I would just like to echo the comments that were made. My philosophy about planning for the future is you can never have enough. And, in terms of bandwidth, and I think I realize that's always a challenge for, school districts that have very small budgets, and they're trying to, manage everything that they have to do to deliver those services. But, I can imagine, future technologies getting to some of the things that Tim was talking about of, where you start to have immersive educational capabilities with augmented reality, virtual reality. All of these things are going to take increased bandwidth. And so, I think unfortunately, we're kind of on this treadmill where we have to continue to look at this forever. I mean, we have to keep looking at the infrastructure to support the kinds of capabilities that we want to deliver. And then as I mentioned earlier, I view schools, facilities and libraries as anchor institutions. And I think they have to be well connected because they provide a service to that community that's different than what you will get in your home. So, I think it's you just have to keep planning for more and more capacity.
So this is Kay Hinsey. I'm the latest member of the broadband office. So it's kind of a little bit of a pivot, but I'd be interested in just what you all are starting to see and hear in regards to kind of the extension of your networks, or the ask of the extension of your networks to support the homework gap, basically, around schools. Obviously, I think to Tony's comments earlier in regards to, the missing middle mile is required to get us to the home. But I'm just curious if you guys are starting to hear anything from your constituents in regards to expansion of the existing network.
So I'll start off there, and then anybody else can jump in. So one of the things that has come up for our school districts in the past has been a request to actually do something very much like what you talked about. Extending that school network or part of the access that that school network has, because obviously nobody likes the idea of just providing the school network into a home.
Right.
That's a recipe for disaster. But some of the upstream access and bandwidth capacity that our school districts have, we've had requests for, can we extend this over to this community building, over to this library, over to this housing complex. I know that some school districts in the state have actually done some of that, and it has not always turned out well. And that's actually kept us, those experiences of not turning out well, has actually kept us out in this area of the state from doing a lot of that. So the reason that it hasn't turned out well, it was nothing to do with problems of security or problems of deployment. It's been problems of regulation. So because we fund our broadband access through the federal E-rate program, there are a lot of, like any bureaucracy, there are a lot of restrictions and rules in place to prevent program abuse. And I'm definitely not advocating for program abuse, but one of the issues is that the requirement that all of the bandwidth be delivered only to the school district and only for the students in that school at the time means that we are not able to extend access into other facilities at other locations, even if that would be a benefit to those same students, because it can be considered a violation of program rules, and nobody needs to be there, because we then would be looking at funding denials, and there even are instances of USAC, the company that manages E-rate for the FCC, coming back, revealing a program rule violation, and then coming back on the applicant, the school district, and collecting past money that they've distributed. So it's a concern. And I think every time you hear somebody talk about it at any level, we're like, we need to close the homework gap. We need to close the homework gap. What are we doing to close this homework gap? And so my initial response is usually that, well, there's some stuff that we'd love to do if you could help us cut through some of that red tape.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As we move towards 5G, what studies are we doing or looking at on effects on our students?
To make sure I understood the question, you said as 5G becomes more of a reality and gets deployed, are you asking what impact you think that's going to have on our students?
I'm asking in terms of their health, right? We're looking at anything in terms of their health, the health of the students as we move towards 5G.
If you say in terms of the health of the students, I think there's really nothing I can answer in that regard. If anyone else has some comments about that, I was going to go more in the direction of, people talk about 5G and the advent of 5G. First thing I'll tell you, it's not here yet. As much as people try to advertise that they do have 5G, I think it will get deployed. I think you will see most of those deployments occur in the places you would anticipate them to be deployed, which is densely populated urban areas. Some of the vendors are talking about deployments in rural communities. I always look at mobile connectivity as a complementary capability. I don't view it as an alternative. We can have a debate about how that plays out in urban environments, but I think in rural communities, it's not going to address or really help the problem. So I'm still going down the path of believing you really need to have this physical connectivity to schools which is fiber, it would be my best choice, you know, and with microwave being the second choice, depending on what you can afford to pay for. And I'd let anybody else try to address the question if you can.
Yeah, Tony, this is Tim. I would say the same thing, that what we're looking at is after that middle mile or after the network gets here. And I don't see many districts going to deploy 5G within their infrastructures. That would be delivering infrastructure to their infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I guess we have to leave it up to those that the FCC and those that put their stickers and safety labels on it, that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and do that testing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are you referring to the health concerns, the electromagnetic radiation issue that?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
exactly what I'm referring to.
Yes. And I think I would echo what Tim said. It's certainly not going to be, you know, as school people, none of us would be interested in, and certainly no one else from the state or from Education Superhighway would be interested in forcing anyone to do something that was not good for their health. But I know there's some controversy around that, and we have to hope that people do the right testing and everything. And we have a lot of options, and we'll pursue all the options for connectivity that we can.
I appreciate that. I'm just planting the seed that it is an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we just have a few minutes left, so I want to get to this last question for each of the panelists. What's one takeaway you would share with the rural district leadership on broadband needs and the changing digital landscape? I don't know who wants to take that first.
This is Josh. I'll go. I guess I'll take that first. I would just say that there's never been a better time to look at upgrading if you feel like your current connectivity is not either currently not adequate or will not be adequate in the near future. There's more competition, there's lower prices, and there's more resources available to you, free resources available to you to help with doing a procurement and finding your solution. And, you know, obviously we're here to help for another year. All the other folks on the call are here to help. And, you know, even we've talked to a lot of folks when we first talked to them, they're like, oh, I've been trying to get this done for 10 years and I've just hit roadblock after roadblock. And we're all here to help you get through those roadblocks. So even if it's been a frustrating process in the past, don't give up. It's really a great time with the current E-rate rules, with other funding available, and with the support that you've heard about on this call. I think the time is ripe. So, you know, please reach out if you'd like to explore your options and find out what's available to you in your area.
Yeah, I'll jump in next. I think that I guess it's kind of a two-part answer for me. The first part is that your bandwidth needs are probably going to increase faster than you realize. I know that that's been true for us historically. And then the second part is kind of echoing what Josh had just said, but that is that if you are in a contract year or coming up on a contract year, please reach out to us at the CEBC. Our website is the best way to get in touch, coloradobroadband.org. We have a sign-up form there, as well as a general questions form that you can fill out and get in touch with one of us.
I think my comments would be the same. Basically, I think we have the same take on what our takeaways are. Mine would be network, network, network. Reach out to people, and we're all stronger together then we are by ourselves, so don't live on an island. And the last thing, I would echo what Jared says, in that, yeah, our needs are going to grow a lot faster than what we think they will. When I talk to some of my local districts and their administrators, I don't think they understand how quickly they're using up what they already have. They think it's going to last forever. So we need to be diligent in sharing that voice.
And mine is just what I would add, just the challenge of the status quo, dealing with the existing incumbents, and they're being prepared for the future. It's going to be difficult for a lot of districts over the next 5 years. That they won't be ready for what the district's going to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Just like today.
And this is Tony. Yeah, thanks, Tim. And this is Tony. I think I would echo some of the comments that Arlene made, is that it's really important to agree to work together. You know, I don't believe that you give up any of your sovereignty as an entity, you know, by agreeing to join an organization like the CEBC. You know, that can really help with the RFP process, particularly when you're limited in terms of resources, but you still have the choice to go on your own if you want to. And so I'm just going to continue to encourage collaboration.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our presenters for joining us today. I think it was a great conversation. We'll have this recording posted on our website, which is broadband.co.gov, sometime in the next few days. And we will also post all of the links that we talked about so that you can find all those as you need them. And that's it. Thanks for attending.